Hey, welcome, folks. This is Virgil the Philosopher. Today we're going to talk about equality. We're going to talk about prejudice. So stick around. We got a pretty interesting show today. All right. So let's talk about bias and prejudice. It seems to me that bias and prejudice are often caused by something called script. Now, if you don't know what that is, it's okay. Um, so script is what we all believe to be true. That may not be true. It's kind of like if you have a dog and the dog is a German Shepherd, and you say, okay, that dogs are German Shepherds. Did you notice how it was not German Shepherds or dogs, but dogs are German Shepherds? Okay. So then you go see a Doberman, or you go see a Rottweiler, or you go see a poodle, or whatever. And you say, okay, someone says, that's a dog. Okay, in your mind, you think, okay, so I saw a German Shepherd. It was a dog, so this must be a German Shepherd. That is a script from top-down thinking. And it is absolutely not true. Unfortunately, we do that with people. So instead of saying every dog must be a German Shepherd in order for it to be a dog, we do something like all people must act this way, or otherwise they're deficient. Sounds pretty familiar, huh? So I know people who are autistic, and they complain to me about this. And it's a common thing where they are not seen as different; they are seen as deficient because they do not fit. This is what people do, and it's a bias. It's a bias because when you have the majority, I believe it's a majority bias where if most things are like this, then anything else must be deficient. Um, and that is just absolutely not true. There is other things going on besides majority bias. Oh, because so you may not have a majority of uh, you may not have majority of German shepherds, but the script still applies. So we have to be wary of our scripts. So how does that work into having prejudice and bias? It's quite interesting, and it works in such a way that we feel that those who are not like us, because us is what makes the script, they must be less than deviants. So anything that is deviant from the norm is considered deficient. And that is why I think, and I have to agree, that we look at autism and we say that's deviant from the norm. It must be deficient. And you could say, well, it has this thing and this thing. It has problems with communication, has problems with emotional regulation, has problems. Okay. Well, if you looked at it from the autistic point of view, you would be seen as overly emotional, manipulative, dishonest. These are all pathologic to their eyes. So imagine if the autistics, their group was the majority, in which we would then define what deviant is and what is normal. Then a neurotypical standpoint, which is right now 90%, 95% of the population, if they were put in the 5% of the population group and the autistics were the 95, then they would be sent to counseling. They would be given medications. They would be, because these would be dishonest, not all of them, but the temptation is to not hold truth as the standard, but hold one emotion and hold what other people feel about you as your standard. And so you can see where difference becomes pathological in the eyes of deviance from the norm. And that, I believe, that is where prejudice, that is where bias come from. Now, that's from, you can look this up. It's called top down thinking. It's where you hold script for what things should be. Okay, and it's not bad. It has its place. Let's say you go into, if you lived 4,000 years ago and you were in Africa or something, and you see the grass move. Script says it could be a lion. If you're a if you're a bottom to top thinking, you'd be like, well, there's many things that move grass. It could be the wind. It could be anything. A lion would not be on the top of what you're thinking. You're just like, yeah, the grass moves. It's almost like you're doing it for safety. It's like what do they call it when you have it's instinctual. And well, neurodivergent people tend not to have this, though. They have to know what things are by the qualities thereof. So they would have to literally experience a lion coming out of the bushes to know that in the future there could be a lion in the bushes. Whereas neurotypicals tend to be a top down group, and they would say, okay, if I was told about lions, the bushes are moving, it's probably a lion. Could be a lion. Like you error on that side first and then think about it. Whereas the bottom to the top thinking is you think about it before you do the error. And they both have their qualities. Like it's instinctually, it can keep you alive. It's a shorthand. It's like a shorthand version of communication and learning and doing life. Whereas the bottom to the top is longhand. It's expressive. It takes more time. It's more detailed. It has its benefits as well. You do not tend to benefit from a top down thinking if you're a chemist. You have to be bottom up, or I shouldn't say have to be, but you tend to do better if you're a bottom up. Why? Because then you have to build that framework of compounds, of all the different ways that they can form, function, react, and you can make this intricate inner world of understanding. But if you're a top down, you think, okay, generally this happens, generally this happens, generally this happens. And unfortunately, in chemistry, you literally have to know the details. It's all the devil's in the details. So to summarize and to say, I'm right 80 to 90% of the time is not good enough. And so there's good and bad. When you Anyway, going back to prejudice and bias and such, yeah, I really believe that the top-down thinking is why it exists. It's not necessarily it allows it to exist. It's not why. There's a lot of reasons why something happens, like a car accident. Was it when did the last event actually dictate a car accident? Who can say? Was it because they were speeding? Was it because the other person wasn't looking? Was it because the red light was ran or the stop sign was ran? Was it because their brakes were shoddy? Was it because there was ice? Was it because, who knows? But all the factors joined together for it to happen. So to say one thing led to another, it's usually multiple factors. And if one of those factors would have not happened, then it may not have happened. And so with prejudice and with bias, we come to a situation where our shorthand leads us to believe that, okay, this is what is considered right, this is what's considered normal, and so we will consider what is considered right and what is considered normal, and anything deviant must be automatically either less than, it must be clinically deficient, we must deal with it clinically, or they must have some kind of pathological reason. And I believe that's why we treated things external. We The minorities, Generally, when we say minority, when I say minority, I don't mean just like African American, Hispanic. That is from the American point of view. But if you lived in Africa, if you lived in the Barbary Coast, you would have had white slaves. Just like North America had African American slaves, if you lived in the Barbary Coast, which is northern Africa, on the Mediterranean, you would have had. It was very common that the pirates of the Barbary Coast would take Europeans as slaves. So you would have been a minority in a predominantly African society. So there's that. Also, if you were uh, if you were Asian descent, and of course in North America you would probably be a minority. Also, if you were of European ancestry, you would have been a minority in Asia. So this can apply to not just North America. This minorities all around the world at different times. And so it's pathological. You're seeing pathological very often if you're a minority because you didn't fit the criteria of what norm was, the norm. And in fact, we still do this today. We often say what is healthy is the most common. This is standard. This must be healthy. That's not true. We need to build what's healthy upon what is the most, what has the highest, what is the most optimal, not necessarily what is the most common. And if everyone smoked, your whole, population group, is that the most optimal? And if someone didn't smoke, you would be tempted to say, okay, they must have something pathological because they're not participating in this behavior. Now, we consider that jokingly, right? Because we know that smoking it causes harmful effects. But imagine if we didn't know that. Imagine if it was something like, it wasn't smoking, but imagine it was like shaking people's hands or saying hi or something like, well, that must be pathological. Everybody does it. See how quickly it becomes. And if you, in other cultures, if you did say hi, if you were outgoing, if you did smile, that would be considered pathological or deviant from the norm, especially in places like Japan. There are certain other groups, even in some parts of Appalachia, they don't really want to talk. It isn't that they're rude, but they're very tight knit, very close society. And so to be outgoing is almost threatening. It's rude. There's even a song. How did it go? There was a song by Leonard Skinner. If you don't ask me no questions, I won't tell you no lies. So it's pretty common. But you can see where, one group thinks it's pathological because it's the most common. It must be because they're pathological. I'm sorry, I must have said that. One group, because they're the most common, they see a minority or a subset or a difference as pathological because it does not represent the common. And I have to go back and I think, why were there so many witch trials? Well, why were they? Were these people different? What did we do with different people? Well, history has some pretty horrible things we did with different people. We put them in institutions. We put them in asylums. And in that we created often what we were, the very thing we try to protect ourselves against. We try to protect ourselves against pathology and problems, and in a sense, we became the pathological problem by our actions. Prejudice is not good. Bias is not okay. It is easy to go into. It's easy to say it is wrong. But instead of looking at what groups simply to say this is wrong, this is wrong because we shouldn't be anti-African American. That's great. But then at the same breath, we'll say let's talk about women's rights. Let's give women the right to vote. That's great. Let's give them the right for an education. Awesome. But then at this, we'll say, well, you know, these other groups, they remind us of uh, the oppressors. And so we must then not show them the same kind of respect and desire we want for everyone else. And unfortunately, that's extremely common. That's extremely common. I hear in South Africa right now, what's going on is I, it, that the government, since the mid 90s, 1990s, it went from being controlled by a minority, a subset of European descendants to African descendants. Great. It represented the people. Awesome. But what happened was that it became even further uh, bias and prejudice than it became what it was trying to get rid of. It became much, much further along in bias and prejudice. It against those that at one time were the minorities and had the power. And so what happened is that these people with power, once they lost power, were then treated as if with the same kind of indignation that those with power originally treated the local population with. It used to be seen that Europeans were smarter, more beautiful, and all that. And I'm not going to get into it. I don't agree with that, of course. But then once the minority came out of power and the local population came into power, they saw them as the minority and they stripped them of rights. And if you go there now, if you research it now, South Africa is one of the most racist countries in the world. But yet they've been ran by the population, the majority population, for quite a while. Why is that? And I believe it's script. What is minority is allowed to be seen as deviant and is allowed to be seen as problematic. Now, with South Africa, it's a little different. I'm sure there's pent up anger, maybe some vengeance, that kind of thing. So, there's that going on too, but it's an easy sell. It's much harder to sell someone that they can be wrong, especially if most people are wrong. It's much easier. It's a fallacy, or where a group will look at each other and say, no, well, they're all saying this, so it must be you. Well, that works a lot of the time, but there's a lot of very strong occurrences where it actually was not right. Nazi Germany, great example. When they were rounding up the Jews and they were murdering the Jews, what they were doing was excusing it. They were excusing that behavior. And so if you were to oppose them, what would they say? Well, we all agree to this, and who are you? So therefore, if the majority of people think this is right, it's more likely it's correct than just simply you think it's not correct. It's a prejudice. It's a fallacy, a way of thinking. It's illogical. And I'm going to be doing a whole series on fallacies, where you have the group think, you have straw man arguments, you have stuff like that. It's fallacies. And you have to be aware of these fallacies and how they play into life, because they are falsehoods, they're falsities, they're lies. And so it's your responsibility to look into what you hear and not simply go by what it appears to be. But it is your responsibility to take what you hear, hold it up, look at it, examine it for yourself. And I'm not saying what you should come up to, but I am saying you should examine it. You may come up to a different opinion than I am. That's great. But you still need to examine it. All people are allowed to have their own opinion. But an opinion that is unexamined, is it truly worth the same as an opinion that is examined? For instance, we want to think that, okay, truth is relative, my opinion, who's to say that I have the right to share with it, compared to your opinion? Fine. But I'm going to tell you this. Those people who are trained to be surgeons, I'd much rather have those people doing brain surgery than somebody off the street who watched something on Grey's Anatomy. Just saying. Everyone has an opinion. Everyone is equal. However, that doesn't mean your opinion is equal. And I want to touch on this. Before I end this. Just like a car accident, where there's a lot of things that have to align for that event to happen. But if one thing did not align, it could have been prevented. I also believe that bias, prejudice, one of the things that it uses is these scripts. Now, the script in itself isn't so horrible. It could be very beneficial. But when the script, instead of you deciding what the truth is, then the script tells you what the truth is, and then it denies you the ability to think for yourself, and then it's imposed upon you to think that way. Well, that's like groupthink. That's oppression. You see this when you're in a group of several people and they're all trying to make you, okay, what should we do for this project? You have that one outgoing person who pressures everyone around them to think just like they do. Okay. So you believe that. That's wonderful. But why do I have to think like you? And then once a couple other people fall because they don't have a spine, or they're meek and they don't want a confrontation, so they just give in to that one person's wish, then you start to have that it's fallacy, where the group now has decided. Well, the group really didn't decide. The group was coerced and pressured to go along with this person. And now, if you oppose the group because you can see what's happening, then you must be in the wrong, because obviously if all these people think differently, then you must be in the wrong. So then what? I believe there's other things at play too. Because once you do oppose the group, groups exist early on. Everybody wants to be in the group because there's resources available to everyone, right? But then once a group starts getting a lot of members, it needs to find its identity. And not only find its identity, it's usually at this point that resources become scarce. So while the resources are scarce and they're trying to find their identity, then they have the gatekeeping of what does it mean to be a member of the group. Okay, so in order to be a member of the group, you have to look like this, act like this, be this. It's simply that if they keep the gates open and just let everybody be part of the group, then what is the definition of the group? The group would cease to exist. For instance, if everybody decided to be if everybody said that they were Pacific Islander, then would the definition of Pacific Islander, if we allowed everyone else to be Pacific Islander, would they not lose the very definition of what they are, and in fact lose who they are? Not just definition, but lose their identity. So the group has this problem. His identity is lost. challenge of identity, so they make it more difficult to be a member of the group. And also there's usually a loss of, or at least a restriction of resources. So in order to keep the resources you have to limit the amount of people able to get into your group. I believe we're doing that in our southern border with Mexico, and a lot of places in Europe are doing that similarly with their immigrants. And so what happens is that we are redefining what it means to be a member. All right. This is usually when you're either with us or you're against us, and so on and so forth, where it's the group telling its members. This is the group telling its members what it means to be in the group, and not its members telling the group. It's the group telling its members. It's the script, and it's going to be imposed, and that's where I believe prejudice and bias comes from. Because if you have these resources, then it's going to be us versus them. And if you're not with the group, you're against the group, and you will be ostracized and kicked out of the group from the resources. And so people usually just go along with what the group says, and it becomes weaponized. And I believe that's where it's one of the things that has to align, that allow bias and allow prejudice. And it's shameful. There's a couple other things I was considering too. Talking about southern borders, talking about Europeans' borders, talking about all these immigrants. It seems. All right, I'm back. I had to stop for a second and look some of this stuff up. So when you have a group that tells, okay, we are the group, and we must believe, we all believe this thing, and you must be wrong. There's a fallacy assorted to that, right? A fallacy is a way of thinking or an argument that is not necessarily true, but it's believed to be true. And it's called argumentum ad populum. Essentially, it's an appeal to popularity. Just because everybody believes it doesn't mean it's true. And there's so many wives' tales that, it must be true. There must be a nugget of truth in it. You ever heard any of those? Oh, a lot of people believe that. There must be something with that. Or there may not be anything with it. It's just what they were told and they believed it. Belief is one thing. Truth is another. You can believe that, the earth is flat, which they did for a very long time. That doesn't mean it's flat. You could believe that the earth is the center of the universe, which they did for a very long time, but it's not the center of the universe. They also believed that you should drain someone's blood called bloodletting. And they believed that diseases were spread through miasma, bad air. No, just because it's believed by the masses doesn't mean it's true. And this is the problem where these scripts, they don't ask for what's true. They ask for what's believed. You're appealing to emotion. You're appealing to that gut feeling you have. People say, I have a gut feeling. Are you sure you're not manipulated? Salesmen use these tactics all the time. They will play with your emotions. They'll play with your instincts to sell you something. And they're trained to do that. They are not your friends. All right. So when you have a group, the second issue, besides the fallacy, is ethics. When you have a group that says this is right, because not only do they believe it because this thing to be correct, and there's a difference between, yes, we believe the facts to be like this, therefore we're right, and that is another fallacy. Just because you believe the facts are correct or the majority doesn't mean that the application of that information is going to be the best course of action. So let's say not only are you dealing with the issue that, okay, we believe these things to be true. And maybe you are true, but even if you are correct that this information is true, because you have to pass the fallacy, the popularity fallacy check first. Then you have to go and then check, okay, let's look at the ethical principle. Utilitarianism. Is it truly the best? I mean, it has problems. Is individuality the best? It has its problems too. So it has to be just because this helps the most people may not be the best idea. And I keep coming back to Nazi Germany. You know, what they were doing were rounding up the Jews, they were rounding up the minorities so that it would benefit the population of Germany. So, some pretty horrendous things occur from the popular action from utilitarianism. You know, you have genocides, you have uh, all kinds of stuff like that, imprisonment, and torture, and murders, and just the horrible things, because the majority of people aren't affected by this horrific act. And so, therefore, because the majority of people are not affected, it must be okay. And it's not okay. That is why you can't blindly say what the majority of people think must be correct, because it can still be quite evil. And unfortunately, when you're dealing with script, you're often going to run into this is true because it's the most popular. But then it's also true because this is what we believe. And since we're the majority, this must be the facts. Well, both of those can be absolutely wrong. You can get the facts wrong, and you can also get the application wrong. Now, utilitarianism has its flaws, but so does individuality. Individualism has its flaws. There's a thing that they call the what do they call it? The trolley problem. You know, you're basically a train, and you have a chance to go on one track or the other. And one track has like four people, like track tied to the, whatever. They're tied there, and then the other one has one. And what would you do? Would you change the track? Now, I hate this. It's assuming. The whole premise is assuming all kinds of things. But a lot of people say, yeah, I would hit the one person. And I look at that. I think, yeah, that's utilitarianism in its core. But maybe there's a third option besides hitting the one or hitting the five or whatever. Maybe instead of changing the track, because if you don't know a track, you generally have to get off the train. You'd have to stop the train, get off the train, change the track. At least this is the way it used to be. Maybe a long time ago. Maybe I need to get caught up in how trains work. But it used to be this way. If you have time to change the track, why do you not apply the brake? Why don't you call for some help? If you could see them that far away, you are not tied. And that's another fallacy. The fallacy of thinking you only have the two options that are presented to you. There's almost always more than two. It's not this or that. And I wonder what that's called. The fallacy of not. Hold on, let me look. All right, I'm back. It's called a false dilemma. That's the fallacy of only having two options. And that is the trolley problem. And, it's easy just to believe what you're told. You must be this or that. You're either with us or you're against us. You're either going to hit these people or you're going to hit those people. The problem is it doesn't give you autonomy to think of. Could be a third option, fourth, fifth. If you have the option to go change the track, that tells me all kinds of things. One, you have time. This isn't happening now. It isn't like you push the button now. You have to go do something. And if it's an old train, 1800s trolley, I'm thinking old. If this is an old city where they used to have trolleys, you have to go manually change the track. You have to get off the thing and change it. Why would you hit these people? Stop the train. Look at the situation. See if there's other options. Then make your decision. So there's that is called the, what is it, false dilemma fallacy. There's another fallacy where, it's it has to be right now. You have to make your decision currently, right now. Then, no, you don't have to do that. But it's just my thoughts. And anyway, this is Virgil, your philosopher. And yeah, thank you for joining with me. And next time we're going to go over each fallacy. We're going to go over a list of fallacies. There's going to be several lists of them. We'll go through and how each one applies. And you're just getting a taste of what fallacies to watch out for. And fallacies are indeed just lies that people just take face value. This must be true. And they're not. And they create a lot of havoc and harm. People get harmed and hurt from things that are not true, that are avoidable. Like this person hitting 1 or 5 of these people on the train track instead of stopping the train because they were told they only had. Who is the person that tells you? Who are they? You just read it in the blurb. You either have to hit one or the other. Is that person knowledgeable? You have to stop the train. You have to change the track. Who are they? You have to ask. Are they knowledgeable about this train? Do they know? Do they know how the train functions? Can you not just stop the train? You don't have to kill somebody. You can just stop it. So there's an assumption also that the person who's telling you that you only have 2 choices, that they're knowledgeable. Well, that's a fallacy too. So as you live life, these fallacies are going to free you from being a tool or a victim. You don't have to play the game. You can see through it. And you can choose to be different. This is going to help you be autonomous and be better. All right. Again, this is Virgil, the philosopher. And thank you.